I've been thinking a lot about the media, particularly its mainstream leftist corporate manifestations, and wondering what the deal is with the way they choose and cover stories. The best I can figure is they want to make life miserable for ordinary folks, stir up division, and scoop up profits along the way. It's why they lied and told us the Covington kid was a terrible racist because he had the wrong facial expressions, but that Anthony Fauci was a hero whose calls for lockdowns saved lives, rather than being someone who tried to shut down talk himself of a lab leak causing the pandemic when his own agency funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Racial division, COVID lockdowns, all grist for the mill, right? Now, let's fast forward to March 2022, and rather than lockdowns, large segments of the media seem to be calling for World War III, which could be touched off if they get their wish for a no-fly zone over Ukraine, and the prospect of which, frankly, makes 2 weeks to flatten the curve seem a bit tame. Anyway, to give credit where credit is due, even the rarely lucid Joe Biden isn't falling for this one, which may explain why suddenly the media's Hunter Biden protection racket could be coming to an end. Now, recall that when the New York Post's Miranda Devine, possibly America's last remaining true investigative journalist, uncovered a trove of emails from Hunter Biden detailing dodgy business dealings in Ukraine, serious drug addiction issues, and a personal life that reads like the best of Jerry Springer, big corporate media and big tech in the national security state conspired to keep the story from being told, telling the world it was just Russian propaganda. The New York Post even had its social media accounts locked for promoting their own journalists' work, and Twitter, also, let's not forget, banned other users from sharing the story, even in their direct messages to other Twitter users. All very Chinese social credit system, that. The line that the emails were a Russian hoax was too tempting to give up. CNN's Brian Stelter, among many, cheerled the conspiracy.
CNN reported on Friday that U.S. authorities are seeing if those emails we just talked about are connected to an ongoing Russian disinformation effort.
Russia. And Joe Biden himself said the same thing in a debate with Donald Trump before going on to receive 81 million votes in the November 2020 election.
There are 50 former national intelligence folks who said that what he's accusing me of is a Russian plant. They have said that this has all the five former heads of the CIA, both parties, say what he's saying is a bunch of garbage. Nobody believes except them.
Yeah, Russia, Russia, Russia. Anyway, a year or so later, the New York Times has gone and admitted what everybody else knew. The Hunter Biden emails were real. Senior Times reporter Maggie Haberman, in an act of gaslighting so spectacular it would make the Australian Labor Party blush, tweeted, quote, a deep dive into the Hunter Biden investigation, including that the emails released in late 2020 and characterized as possible Russian disinformation by some were authentic. Oh, now you tell us? Looking back, it seems like a pretty big effort by people who had a big stake in knocking Trump out of office to stop any bad news about the Bidens getting out into the hands of that pesky creature known as the American voter. At the very least, this was an incredible dereliction of duty by the media, which now wants us to act like this was no big deal, just like they're trying to rewrite the history of the COVID pandemic and told us that the George Floyd Black Lives Matter riots were mostly peaceful as they stood in front of whole cities on fire. But you have to wonder, is the fact that the official narrative changing an indication, is this an indication that Biden, who is doing horribly in the polls and is holding back on the wider war many are apparently cheerleading for, has lost favor with those who put him in power? I mean, if you wanted to see things really kick off in Europe and create yet another crisis to help cement the Democrats in power, I can't imagine a better person to put in the Oval Office than Biden's presumptive replacement. Take it away, Kamala.
I am here, standing here on the northern flank, on the eastern flank, talking about what we have in terms of the eastern flank and our NATO allies, and what is at stake at this very moment. What is at stake this very moment are some of the guiding principles around the NATO alliance.
So Ukraine is a country in Europe. It exists next to another country called Russia. Russia is a bigger country. Russia is a powerful country. Russia decided to invade a smaller country called Ukraine. So basically, that's wrong.
President Duda, I wanted to know if you think, and if you asked the United States to specifically accept more refugees.
Okay. A friend in need is a friend indeed.
Okay, I can first.
Miranda, and we've been talking about this story, you and I, for 17 months now. We've known all along that this was true, and I urge everybody to go out who has not picked up a copy of Laptop from Hell to go get that book, because it breaks down forensically just the absolute scandalous behavior of Hunter Biden and how it has been covered up by the media. But what I want to ask you about this, you had another story and a great editorial in the New York Post today about how the 51 so-called intelligence experts, very high-ranking former officials, all said, oh, this is just Russian disinformation, don't believe it, it's just from Russia, Russia, Russia. And they now still refuse to acknowledge that this was in fact correct. We had Twitter banning the Post from posting about it. You couldn't even send the story to somebody else on their Twitter direct messages. That's how much they wanted to suppress the story. Is the bigger scandal not all of the stuff that Hunter Biden got up to, but the way it looks like much of the media, much of the national security state, much of big tech conspired to essentially keep this information from the American people to put their thumb on the scale of the November election?
Exactly, James. Look, this was all about getting rid of Donald Trump, and it was all about rescuing Joe Biden from the consequences of his own corruption through 40 years as a senator for Delaware, and then the 8 years that he was vice president, when he manipulated the power that he had in countries like Russia, China, Ukraine, just to name three that are in the news at the moment, to benefit his family and his son Hunter, who was a pathetic figure, a crack addict, and apparently has now reformed, so good for him, but he was in no position to be collecting tens of millions of dollars for his own business acumen. So clearly there was wrongdoing there, and the most egregious thing for me was that story you referenced that's on the front page of today's New York Post. It's these 51 former very senior intelligence officials in the United States, including John Brennan, who was the CIA director during the Obama-Biden years, James Clapper, Leon Panetta, Michael Hayden. These are all very high-ranking intelligence officials. They wrote this scurrilous letter about 5 days after our story appeared in the New York Post before the election in 2020. And they claimed that the laptop, the information that we had published, had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. And, that was enough to get Joe Biden off the hook. And, there were so many media outlets from CNN and MSNBC and the Washington Post, you name it, the Democrat-friendly media outlets, the establishment, prestige media outlets, all went with that line, all traduced the New York Post as peddling Russian disinformation. The Hunter Biden laptop story, the laptop from hell, is not really about Hunter Biden. It's about Joe Biden, and it's about the fact that all these tens of millions of dollars have compromised him in the eyes of at least Russia and China and Ukraine, these countries that are adversaries, and certainly Russia and China. And the people of Russia and China, President Xi and Vladimir Putin, they know exactly what Joe Biden did for that money. They know how much money went into the bank accounts of his family and friends. And the American people don't know. The rest of the world doesn't know. And I think that is a big problem. And those 51 intelligence officials are largely to blame. And so that's why we went to each one of them and we asked them if they now had an apology, wanted to rescind their claim that the laptop was Russian disinformation. Not one of them apologised, and a few of them did respond, but like James Clapper, former head of the NSA, they just doubled down. They said they were right. These people will never admit what they did.
This is another one of these consequences of going so hard on Russia. Well, what are you going to do? You're pushing Russia and China closer together, which is insane and which just shows how bad the foreign policy establishment in the U.S. has been, not just through the Biden presidency, but also this started, back during Obama and even before then, that you would push those two together. And now they're talking about selling oil denominated not in dollars, but other currencies, including Chinese currencies, which would weaken the reserve status of the U.S. currency. Now, remember the fact that so many countries hold so many trillions of dollars in U.S. bonds. That's one of the things that keeps the entire system stable. If those aren't worth anything anymore, then suddenly the game changes completely, and in no way that's good for the U.S., and in no way that's good for the West, and certainly in no way that's good for Australia.
We also saw a large kind of rally that Putin was trying to do, trying to imitate Donald Trump, a big rally with a big crowd. And for weird reasons that people are still trying to get an answer for or figure out, Putin's live broadcast, remember this is a totalitarian dictatorship, was suddenly abruptly cut by somebody, and they went to some other kind of music or something. Did he stumble? Did something happen? We don't know, but have a look.
Так получилось, что начало операции совпало, совершенно случайно совпало с днем рождения одного из наших выдающихся военно...
Yeah, that's look. I mean, I think there seems to be a lot of problems with Russian TV broadcasts here. Can you believe that they don't even have a 10-second delay on the thing here?
Right.
But I mean, I will just make this one point. It is great to see so many people all furious about human rights, Russian dissenters, people speaking up. But, well, number one, the Soviet Union, of course, lasted for 80 years, 70 years with massive amounts of dissent, and they stayed in power for quite some time. Number two, though, wouldn't it be nice if all of the people who have been out there now discovering that dissent is patriotic again said the same thing about all the people in China who have been dissenting from that regime, but for whatever reason, I don't know, could have something to do with money. The Chinese just come on into for less criticism for their human rights abuses. So riddle me that one, guys.
Exactly.
This guy, Stephen Malinauskas, who's going to be the new leader there, very much in this mold of new labor leader that they're trying to push out right now, very much in the style of Chris Minns. He is from the labor right. He used to run the Shoppies Union. So progressives are all saying, oh, he's far too right-wing. And yet the signs are right now that he is going to be quite left-wing, because one of the very first things he did in his acceptance speech was talk about, an Aboriginal treaty, not just reconciliation, making a treaty. So on these cultural things, I think it's quite interesting. But the other thing that I think is fascinating here was that as the election results came in and Stephen Marshall melted like the marshmallow that he has been so often being accused of, he actually, we'll probably have some footage of it here, we may have seen it, where he just basically ran out of his own election party, said, get me the F out of here. It was very much shades of Malcolm Turnbull in 2016 when he wouldn't come and address the party and after that election. And then he had to be basically dragged back in to address the crowd. So, good riddance to Stephen Marshall, but at the same time, this whole anti-incumbency mood that seems to be out there, I would be pretty worried about this if I was Scott Morrison. Now, last week, The Weekend Australia also revealed Walker was not just violent towards police, but also to those most vulnerable. Quote, bashing, biting, choking. The domestic violence horror Kamala Walker perpetrated on his girlfriend before being shot by cop Zachary Rolfe. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the job of journalists to, report the facts, even uncomfortable ones? Yes, it is a shame that Walker died, but that doesn't change the fact that he was a violent abuser, or that his last act on this earth was to stab a police officer trying to arrest him. Journalists report without fear or favor. And on that note, the NT News, which is also owned by News Corp, ran this story on Friday. Breaking! Zach Rolfe, quote, deliberately assaulted an Aboriginal man while on duty and later lied about it under oath. It can now be revealed for the first time. Well, what I made of it is that, seats these sort of green liberal seats, I call them, seats like Wentworth, North Sydney, potentially eventually Kooyong in Victoria, places like that, that are shifting more and more in this direction. What the real thing that's happening here isn't even so much about Dave Sharma, who's trying to hold back a tide that's happening. The tide is that the real center of gravity for the coalition is moving west. It's moving to Western City. It's moving to more working class suburbs. And it's something that Tony Abbott pegged when he gave his concession speech. And he said, essentially this, that it's no longer about the Liberal Party representing, the moneyed interest, the rich interest, the big end of town, but actually the Liberal Party needs to focus again on representing essentially Menzies' forgotten people. That's where the real heartland is. It's not with a bunch of renewables investors in Wentworth and woke people in North Sydney and all of that.